and we've met great friends and made good discussions and grown a lot in this time. So we thank the church for being involved in that, and I thank all of you for coming in and being involved with that too. So with no further ado, it's my free will right now to address and ask Dr. Joanne Reed to come up to the mic. If you want to, by the way, if you'd like to get on the email list that I mentioned and aren't, please talk to me and we'll get your name on the email list.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning. How are you all? I'm not as regular a person up here as Scott and Mike. I do occasionally, so this is one of my occasionals. Look at that. Back in May, our friend Scott Thompson delivered another one of his absolutely delightful, thoughtful, cogent, and illuminating messages. His subject was free will. The question was, do we have free will? And he answered, no, we do not. Well, I sat there and said, I'm sure that many others of you went, And so I asked Scott for his slides so that I could present what he said and then present my own view on the subject. One of the things he talked about was philosophy, and he began, of course, with Epicurus, and Epicurus had the basic idea that free will exists because there's a variety of things going on in the universe. It just sort of happens. At the same time, he also presented that Isaac Newton said, no. For every action, there is a prior cause. If there's an effect, there's a cause. And this is an important part of the whole subject of determinism. He also talked about the idea of pulling your own strings. The idea that you are a complex being. You have had all sorts of experiences. You've done all sorts of things. But in fact, the way you operate is mentally, you are your own puppeteer. You operate your strings. You make yourself do these things. And so, in effect, you are not in control, if you will, that there is a puppeteer that's in control. He also pointed out the pitfalls of logical certainty. And he began with the idea of the deductive proof, that is, given, and the if-then logical approach. The idea of inductive proofs, that is, starting from nothing, doing observations, compiling data, so that sooner or later you can say, this appears to be true. Physical impossibilities, he talked a little bit about them. Consciousness as well. What is consciousness? Try to analyze that. Try to come up with a definition of consciousness. I don't know. Free will. He said it is not. Things like randomness. It's not a decision that comes from the universe and then impinges itself upon you. That really we're talking about making choices based upon our priming, our history, our context, and that kind of thing. And came down to the bottom and said, libertarian free will is an illusion. I personally had a problem with that statement. And that determinism shouldn't be scary. It's how to be your consistent self. And I thought about that. He brought up this chart, an important chart for us all to look at, in that he compared libertarianism with illusionism and with compatibilism. And looking at across the board here, in essence, he always finds that, yes, determinism is the key. Everything appears to go towards determinism. That is, everything is determined a priori. And this is something which I hesitated. He says, all right, let's look at this. Free will and its concerns of human choice. He says it's not legal contradictions, defying physical laws, or constraints and norms. He says it's the ability to choose among alternatives, okay? but the ability to choose otherwise, but it's not the ability to choose otherwise than what you did. That is, if you go into the past and you look at an event that you did, and you made a choice, if we go back and look at it again, you'll continue to make the same choice, ad infinitum. You will not make a different choice. And I sort of went, I'm not comfortable with that. So here's a synopsis, the basics of what Scott said. We live in a deterministic universe. Since the first instance of the universe, the causes have been outlined, or the effects have been known, so everything leads to a single inevitable effect. The causality results in a universe that is determined. Therefore, free will, that is the ability to select an action and thereby a result, is an illusion. All actions and their results are determined at the genesis of the universe, and I find that all that. So I said, wait. If every single action and every single thing that is ever going to happen has already been predetermined, the creator of the universe fulfills the definition of God. Hallelujah! Praise the Lord! Science has proved that God exists. Well, perhaps not. Okay, sorry. My Baptist upbringing, okay? Scott and all of us use what is called a logical argument. That is, when you develop an argument, you take a series of premises, basic ideas, and you build on them one at a time. Now, premises have to follow certain rules. So, in a logical argument where you're talking science and that kind of thing, not opinions, premises must be valid. They must be valid, and they must present verifiable information and or data which can be fully supported. If the premise is not valid, it does not present valid information, it does not present proper data, you have to go back and modify the premise in such a way that it is valid. And if you can't do it, you can't use it. Even more so, if you can't use it, it could be used to defeat your conclusion. That is, this is one way of representing a logical argument. You could also use the idea of a staircase. You start on a basis of something which is broadly understood and broadly accepted, and build one step at a time to a logical conclusion. And this is what we refer to as an argument. I also bring out this because this is one of those things that I feel is terribly important as a person who has been involved with cognitive activities and the whole area of logical and thinking. The whole idea of what is impossible. There are 4 impossibilities. So when we say, oh, that's impossible, as you know, most of the time we throw words around and really have no idea what they mean. But there are 4 of them when you stop and consider it. The first one is a self-contradictory statement. All premises must be internally consistent. To give you an idea, one bright day in the middle of the night, 2 dead boys got up to fight. Back to back, they faced each other, pulled their swords, and shot each other. A deaf policeman heard the noise and came and shot those 2 dead boys. It's delightful. It's delightful because it's self-contradictory. And of course, we can't use that as a premise. The next one is the cosmological impossibility. You can't violate the rules of the universe. So when someone says, in order to do this, we have to exceed the speed of light in this universe. And you go, stop. No, ain't going to happen. It can happen in Star Trek. It happens in my books. They're called fantasy. The third one is temporal. And this is the idea that if you don't have the right place in the right time, it can't occur. So when you think about Julius Caesar stepping out of his Rolls-Royce limousine, and the television cameras focusing in on him, and the reporters rushing up with their microphones, and down the stairs comes Brutus, And you see, and he pulls out his .44 Magnum and shoots Caesar. And the microphones come in and go, and Caesar looks up and his last words is, "And you, Brutus?" Well, there are elements in there, aren't there? But the temporal problems exist, so we can't use that. Now, the last one is the throwaway, and we've all heard it. In fact, probably many of us have actually said it. You can't do that. It's against the law. It's impossible for you to do that. I heard one person tell me it was impossible for that person to have done it because they were a Christian. It didn't help. So we have to maintain these as part of our background when we're talking about premises. So let's go back here to Epicurus and Newton. And I want to concentrate on the Newton side of it, where every action has a prior cause. All right. If there's an effect, then something caused it. Okay. Let's consider prior cause. We're saying there is an effect. Okay. And if we look at it, we can find the cause of that effect. Yeah. Okay. The effect determines the cause. It doesn't sound right, does it? Yeah. Therefore, to reproduce the effect, we have to reproduce the entire cause. We really have to turn the universe and all of it back to a position where the conditions of the cause occurred. And we ain't going to do that. Now, that's an impossibility. And so, when we look at it, we say, such an action can't occur. It's against all of our impossibilities, so we have to stop. We cannot go any further. The premise has violated the rules of the universe. Again, let's reconsider what happens when a premise does not. We have to look at it and say, we need to back up, we need to look at it again, we need to study it, we need to change it in such a way that it becomes valid. Then we can use it. But remember, if we can't, then you can't use it at all. Since the premise was invalid, we'll return to the default proposition and reconsider. That is, let's reconsider this from the position of the cause. If cause, then effect. Okay. I like that order. If cause, then effect. Given the cause effect, what is the resulting effect event? Oh my. Oh my. Oh dear. Uh-oh. That is, any cause could have multiple effects. Some effects are very, very rare. Some effects are totally common. So if you start from the position of the effect, how do you know the cause? That's a problem, isn't it? So we have to reconsider this whole thing and say, not all effect events occur at the same rate. Some effects are more common than others. And many causes could have the same effect. In this case, this particular cause produces this effect just a little bit. Not often, no, but it does happen. This one far more commonly. This one far more commonly. And this is the major effect of that particular cause. Now, if you're coming from the position of the effect, how do you go back to the cause? I don't know how to do that. And what's the probability? What's the likelihood that you will find the major cause and not get sidetracked with any of those minor causes? Causal effects produce multiple effect events. Many causal events can produce the same effect. Some effect events are common, some are rare. But if the causal events consistently produce the effect events, in the same quantities and proportions, then the causal nexus is probabilistic, not deterministic. And this hypothesis is testable. I also want to go back to the let's go back in time situation. That is, if you go back in time to a position where you made a decision, determinism says you will always, 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 always make the same decision. Well, in fact, you can't do it. Going back in time is one of those things that violates cosmology. You just have to bring the entire universe, all the real and extant and all of the other particles and waves and motions, you have to bring them back. And you just can't do it. But if free will existed, there would be some variance. If we actually could do it, there would be some variance. There isn't, because there is no free will. That's what determinism is telling us. That if you go back, you'll always do the same thing. Again, cosmologically, it's impossible. And it's even problematic as a thought experiment. Now, let's consider a thought experiment. One of them, of course, was Albert Einstein's thought experiment on general relativity. He turned around and said, this is testable. If we look at the precession of Mercury, if we look at the bending of light by gravitational lensings, and if we look at gravitational redshift of light, we will see that my predictions of general relativity are valid. And we did. And they are. Cool. So a thought experiment just can't stand out there on its own and go, ta-da. You have to have something that says it's valid if you're going to use it in science. So what would we do if we turned back the clock? Let's say that, let's do the impossible. Let's turn the clock back. We would see the event. It's called instant replay. Every football game, we see instant replay. So reversing the universe is not only cosmologically impossible, but it would only replay the event that actually happened. This isn't free will. It's history. It's pre-recorded. It's a replay. So we would accomplish nothing by doing that. So stop. Can't use it. Walk away. Since the premise is invalid, return to the default and reconsider. I'm going to look at this in terms of evolution. On the left, you see what we now believe to be the common ancestor of all land and bird animals. This is Tiktaalik, a most unusual creature. It is in form a fish, but it actually looks more crocodilian, doesn't it? It crawled around, evidently, in the mud and estuaries. It was able to get up on land because it had a unique skeletal structure. First, it had hips. Think of the function of hips. Without hips, what do your back legs do? Nothing. They don't propel you. The hips is what takes the force of the legs, transmits it to the spinal column, and moves the entire skeleton. Yeah, you need hips. Also, it has front legs. And how are the front legs held on? They have a very large clavicle, very large bone on the top. And it's very flexible, so it's held on by tendons. And so you could do this, which you can't do with your hips. So you could reach out. The creature could reach out. And it had a neck. Unlike a fish, the entire body has a turn. No, this could go. Wow. It had all the features necessary. And one more. It had the perfect skeleton. Arms and legs. One bone. Two bones. Many bones. 5. 1, 2, many, 5. Arms and legs. Wow. So you see why we say this is probably the originator? And where did it go? It went to dinosaurs, and it went to elephants, and it went to horses, and whales, and birds, and people. Show me the direct path that goes from Tiktaalik to any of them. Determinism says there is a direct path. Probability says, A lot of things happened. And it was like a tree. A single sprout would come up. And that sprout would then create other branches. And those other branches would occur, and then some of them would disappear over time. And these other branches would survive, and they would produce others. And soon we would have a bush. But branches keep dying, and they keep dying. And which one survives? You can't predict it. As the world changes, everything else must change with it. And so, thinking in terms of probability is a wonderful way of thinking about evolution. Evolution is unpredictable and not determined. Whoops, what did I just do? I did something silly. I hit the wrong button. There. Whoa. So, evolution is predictable, not determined. For every extant species, there are many, 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 many species that are extinct. In fact, if you look at the history of life on this planet, it is not a history of life, it's a history of extinction. Entire genera and families of creatures are extinct. If this were determined, they would have been successful. But they weren't. And so they took a chance on survival. And some of them won and some of them didn't. This pattern is probabilistic, not deterministic. Let's look at our own selves, humans. 50,000 years ago, there were many, many, many species of Homo on the planet. There was us, and Homo heidelbergensis, and Homo neanderthalis, and Homo denisovans, and Homo florensis, and probably Homo erectus. What happened to them? There's no good reason for any of them to have gone out of existence. When we look more closely at Neanderthal, we find Neanderthal was not only intelligent, capable of using fire, capable of burying its dead, capable of doing all the things we ascribe to ourselves. Why are they gone and we're still hanging around? I don't know. There's no good answer to that. And if it were deterministic, would there not be an answer? Would there not be a cause to that effect? If it's probabilistic, it happens, right? It happens. Okay, I'm going to get my buttons going. Come on, buttons. There. Oh. This is one of the other slides that Scott had up there. And I point out that this particular slide came from, no, this is my slide. This came from Science Daily. Most recently, groups of scientists are beginning to look at the entire universe in terms of evolution theory. And they are coming more and more and more to the idea that the entire universe is evolutionary. In essence, this new law states that complex natural systems evolve to states of greater patterning, diversity, and complexity. In other words, evolution is not limited to life on Earth, but also occurs in other massively complex systems, from planets and stars to atoms, minerals, and more. This is a crapshoot. This is not determination. See if I can hit the right button this time. I mentioned that it was testable, and yeah, and we can test this. We can test these probabilities. We need to control the entire universe, or are some conditions so insignificant that we can be ignored? That is, when you're doing research, why do you go to a laboratory? Well, if variables are insignificant, you can ignore them. If they can be quantified or controlled or experimentally determined, then we can subtract them. We're not forced to live with them. We can say, I can control that, and then look at the results. This is how we actually work in real laboratories. So let's perform an experiment on free will. Let's take a bunch of humans under controlled conditions, determine their reactions to stimuli. If humans are shown to have a variety of responses to applications of a stimulus, then we can actually put this into a probability curve and say, well, people in general do this or this or this or this. And then I can put you or someone else under these same sets of circumstances and repeat it. Think of this as being, the airplane one. Help. Flying airplanes with computers.
Flight simulators?
Thank you. Yes. Can we simulate all of this stuff? Sure. And we can put you in a condition where you do not know the difference between reality and virtual reality. It's fairly easy to do with modern technology. We can do this and do it quite regularly. This is an interesting thought about doing the same thing that they did with Star Trek, having Star Wars, Star Trek, one of them, where they have the room that you can go into and you live through a new experience. Yeah, we can do that. And we can then test. We can test you and everyone else, and we can put you under essentially the same set of circumstances and look at what you do. If you choose more than one possible action, then that's free will. That is, it's not deterministic. Come on, baby. You can do it. If I hit the right button, maybe it'll work. So we've looked at these things on a grand scale, the universal scale, the scale of evolution of life on the planet. Let's look at the muon G2 experiment. You ready? Okay. Here's a basic model of the most fundamental particles there are. Notice I got a circle around one of them. This is the muon. The muon is an overgrown electron. It's like 220 times the size of the electron, and the tau is like 7 times bigger than the muon. Now, let's remember that the electron is vanishingly small. So 220 times larger is vanishingly small. The muon also doesn't live very long. It only lives like a millionth of a second. But if we put this muon in a high-speed accelerator, time dilates, and it lives longer and longer and longer the faster it goes. So to us, when this thing's going at high speed, we may see it for 2, 3, 10 seconds, which is more than enough to make a measurement. And that's exactly what we did. If I get the right button, come on. What we did is we looked at what is called the Dirac dipole of the muon. Now, this is physics. I don't do physics. So let's all read together. The Dirac magnetic moment corresponds to the tree-level Feynman diagram, which can be thought of as the classical results, which can be calculated from the Dirac equation, which is usually expressed in terms of the G factor, which is A equals G minus the quantity G minus 2 over 2. Now, all of you, except Scott, all of you who understood that. No, okay. Scott knows it. I mean, he does this. So if you calculate it out, the muon has a G of 2. Not 2 point something, 2. Okay. Now, in 1948, Julius Schwinger was looking at the electron, and he really looked down deep into the electron and applied the calculations which looked at the structure of the muon, of the electron, and applied it to the muon. He said, electron, muon, pretty much the same. And he found out that it's not 2. It's 2 minus something. Now let's look at minus 0.00116591804. That's 40 parts per trillion. With now again, look at the probability curve on it. It says there's a spread of the data, which is about 510 parts per trillion. Vanishingly small. Now, we needed to get a better number. And so, this occurred. This is marvelous. This particular cyclotron was at Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island. They put it on a barge, brought it all the way down the East Coast, around Florida, up the Mississippi, up the Illinois River to Lamont. And then 3 nights of truck driving got it to Fermilab. Now, this is big. Notice there's a man. There's an actual man person standing right there. This is big. This is 60 feet across. This is not some tiny little thingy. And so this is the apparatus that we use to determine the G2. Now, in August of this year, Fermi announced their findings, that the U is 2 minus 0.002331 The important part are these 2 particular probability calculations. The first one is this one right here. This is the systematic error of the machine. That is, do nothing, and you're going to see this amount of variance in the output. That is, the signal-to-noise ratio of this particular machine, this particular experiment, is that number. When you actually run the experiment, you will find that this number is much, much, much larger. It's larger by 600 parts per trillion. So you subtract out the systematic error to leave yourself with the error of the experiment. What we find out is that this dipole moment is not a single number. There is a spread in the number. That spread is probability. In all experiments in all of science, we always find there is a spread. There is a spread somewhere. Now, you say, but that's really small. Well, so is the muon. In terms of the muon, this is a big, big, big change. It's like having 1, 2, or 3 elephants. This is an enormous change in the physical aspect of the muon. And so, even at the most fundamental levels, we find probability is driving our equations, not determinism. Well, of course, now the theoreticians have to go back to work. But this is how science works. The theoreticians will come up with something and say, if we know this, and this, and this, this must be true. And then folks like me, the experimentalists, go, how do we measure that? And then we come up with a measurement. Most of the time, we're going to come into a pretty close agreement with the theoreticians. The rest of the time, as in this case, we're going to come up with something different. Then the theoreticians go, and they go back to work. And they restructure what they know in light of this new information. And this is how science works. We work back and forth, slowly but surely, increasing our knowledge and improving our data so that we understand the entire universe far more closely. And so we all try to work very hard together. It's quite a team. So let's review. Are we talking about deterministic or a probabilistic universe? And I wish to talk a little bit about philosophy versus science here, just for a moment. One of Scott's slides was this particular one, and I point out that this particular statement, which is very hard to understand, even when you sit back and read it, is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I point out that we in the world of science separated ourselves from the world of philosophy quite some time ago because of one important thing. The philosophers did not want to run the experiment. So when we deal with science versus philosophy, I have a t-shirt that reads out like this. Philosophy is like looking for a black cat in a dark room. Metaphysics is looking in the dark room, looking for the black cat that isn't there. Religion is looking for the black cat in the dark room that isn't there and saying, I found it. Science is like bringing a flashlight into the dark room to look for the cat. So when we talk about science versus philosophy, the no free will argument is based pretty much on philosophy, not very much on experimental science. In each instance that I've discussed here, we've used science to refute the premises of determinism. That is, philosophy doesn't require proof statements in the same that science does. It needs to be internally consistent. Science requires proof. If you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. And so let's look at this prior analysis and we say, if an effect occurs, it's the product of a cause effect. But cause can have many effects, and many causes can produce the same effect. That's probabilistic. So, when viewed from the perspective of the effect event is always caused by a causal event, therefore the universe is deterministic. But if we turn it around and say the causal event always precedes the effect event, one causal event can yield more than one effect event. Some effect events are more common than others. Some effect events are rare. The difference between the deterministic universe and the probabilistic universe is very difficult to detect. They're close. You have to run the experiments to verify any conclusion. And I'm going to quote from John Doughty, who's a famous person who puts satellites up and puts space probes up to measure our universe. If you think of a probe that's up there, John Doughty probably did it. And his quote is, "If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist." As a chemist, I like that. The deterministic model is essentially untestable. The probabilistic universe is observed routinely in every test and every observation of the universe. So I'm going to conclude that cause always precedes effect. Causal events generate many effect events. Many causal events generate the same effect event. The number and type of effect events are determined experimentally. Therefore, the universe is probabilistic, not deterministic. So, what about free will? Shall we get back to free will for a moment? Yes, you have free will, but, and there's a lot of provisions in here. You can't do anything you want. You're limited. Do tell. If I tried out for the NBA, yeah. Therefore, your potential options are limited. And you choose from your available palette. And let's think about this palette of experience and knowledge and all the other things. You're like an artist. You've got this palette here. And the more you experience, the larger the palette is. And the more options you have. And you can take your brush and you can paint your life. You can go about doing what you wish because you have all of these options. And the more you get, the bigger your options, and the more you can do. But do you? What about free will? Can you do something different? Sure. Will you? Probably not. Pardon me? Depends how bad it hurts the first time. Yeah. So that would conclude my discussion.
We'll walk around.
Do we finally have that microphone working, or are we blurping?
Is this working? You can hear it?
Ah, good.
Good. Doesn't sound like it is to me. Any potential thoughts or questions or where that leads you?
Hello? It works.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I have huge questions about everything that was just said. So,
Gosh, I hope so.
yeah. So, when it comes to comparing a free will universe versus a deterministic universe, do you think maybe playing devil's advocate, we probably could be living in a deterministic universe, but the factors that are involved in calculating every single thing that could lead up into that decision are just so vast
Please speak more slowly and carefully. I'm
that, no
old
problem.
ears.
No problem.
Old ears.
Ooh, that got up in volume all of a sudden. So, when comparing the differences between a deterministic universe and a non-deterministic universe, do you think maybe the calculations that are involved in creating the same thing over and over are just so vast that we don't have the ability to calculate it? And the things that come to my mind in that was two things. One involving evolution. One of them was, I know we did a study a long time ago about objects in space in 3D orbits. When you have three objects all of a sudden in that system, the computer itself couldn't predict what was going on. And that's only because the amount of interactions within a 3D space were just so vast that to be able to predict that happening was just like, that required technology that we didn't have yet. And I think about convergent evolution, right? So when you have a system open in nature, it seems pretty deterministic that eventually, through probability and all that, through the death of animals and natural selection, that a certain body type would take over always. And the examples are like the ichthyosaur, the dolphin, and then sharks, all evolved the same body plan because they had a pretty similar niche that was opened up in nature. And there was also the Feynman diagrams that were brought up a while ago. When two atoms interact, the Feynman diagrams explain like how virtual particles pop out of nowhere and create different interactions. We can't always predict when that's going to happen, and maybe that's because of like an underlying physics that we don't even know about yet. Do you think, given those, it's possible that we just don't have the ability to calculate all of that? Playing devil's advocate, of course.
I love easy questions, don't you? When it comes to things like the three-body problem, we know mathematically it's insoluble. We can't do it. We don't have the math to do it. And so the best we can do is probability. We can't determine anything. And so that is one classic example that demonstrates the probabilistic rather than deterministic universe. At the same time, we can now say, well, let's look at the results. And if we look at the results, there are many results. It all depends on which result you want to look at. Because from that one situation, this and 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 this can all occur. And so is that determined? No, that's the hallmark of probability.
But what if in each one of those situations where it branches out, I'm sorry, what if in each one of those situations where they branch out, there's underlying effects that we don't even have the ability to account for? And eventually that's just like, what if that's just a limit of our current technology?
Oh, I wish I could hear you.
I'm sorry. How's that? Oh, okay, I'll do that. I'll cup the mic.
Don't
So-
hold it close, because it becomes a mumble.
How about that?
Okay, it's too close. I have old ears.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So, what was I going to say? All right. Well, for each one of those effects that happen for when we account for a cause, what if the underlying causes for each one of those branch out are not just random? What if there's underlying causes that we're not even able to detect yet? That are like quantum causes. It might go down to like a whole nother level of physics.
Indeed.
Would it then, if we discover that and we're able to test that 100%, like would
Well,
that
if there
change
are causes
everything?
that we can't detect, then it's simply saying that our model is incomplete. And so we have to go back further and find out how that model works before we can really say anything. And
Yeah.
that again, that's the empirical part of science. So if we can say there are multiple causes that produce the same effect, we have actually said it's probabilistic, not deterministic.
Thank you for your time.
I just wanted to say, to me, I don't see that there's this dichotomy of probabilistic and deterministic. I mean, maybe that's kind of an area that you were looking at too, that things can be deterministic and can have a cause and effect. That's basically what determinism is saying. But there's also probabilities. In most cases, if this cause happens, then things will go on. But I don't see, it seems like you're creating this dichotomy of a deterministic universe and a probabilistic universe. And since there's probabilistic ways, or our best ways of measuring things right now, that is your cue to say that it's obviously not deterministic. But determinism means something different to me. It just means that there are causes and effects, like in evolution or things
The
too.
problem with determinism, though, is it doesn't say that there is cause and effect. We can all agree with that. The problem with determinism says, if effect, then cause. And that's backwards. Causes always happen first. Causes always have multiple effects, and until you can determine the probability of those effects and determine the probability of other causes producing that same effect, you know nothing. And that, by definition, is not determinism. That, by definition, is probabilistic. We're talking the probability that a particular cause produces a particular event, and that these causes all combined together produce the effect, and then trying to separate each one of those causals from the effect so that we know how much each participated in creating this effect. The effect occurred, but determinism says, I know what the cause is.
I don't think
Probability
determinism
says,
necessarily
I don't know nothing.
says that. Determinism doesn't say we know the cause of this effect. We say there is a cause, and things that cause things then have effects.
The discussion that Scott put up was one that said, we know that everything has been predicted. And that's what's said,
Now there you can get to some questions, right? If you say that every action, everything that each of us have done this morning to get us to this point, to sit in this chair and listen to you, is all been predicted and was
No.
determined at the time of the Big Bang, then I think that,
No.
and there are people that say that,
Yes,
but
there
there are
are.
also people that say that to belittle determinism, right? We can say, if you look at why someone is in prison right now, you can start looking at that's the effect, right? And then you can start looking back at causes of that. And sometimes people are in prison. You know, you can go through a whole panoply of reasons why people are there, but that you can look back into the thing that happened that night that caused them to get thrown into prison. You can look at things that happened in their youth. You can look at things that happened to their mother or father even before this child was born. You can look into genetic structure and all those. It's a complicated issue, like was being said over here, but that is what determinism is basically saying, that people are in the situations that they're in based upon causes that came along way before this.
But determinism also says, if you have this particular set of circumstances, you will be. And I say, wrong. You have a choice. You always have the choice because it's probabilistic. You do not have to be the result of your direct environment. You can change. Now, I'm going to point out to a specific person, I'm going to make him very uncomfortable. Scott Thompson came from a very, very, very disastrous life. When he was young, he lived in a hell. Quite frankly, he should have been dead by the time he was 20. He should have been in prison, or he should have been a drug addict, or something other, because his environment said, you're in trouble, boy. What did he do? He changed deliberately. He made decisions on his own. He made his own free will choices not to do that, but in fact to become the person he is today, a person that we love, admire, respect, a person whose integrity is beyond reproach, and whose knowledge of physics and chemistry, physics, is far beyond mine.
Well,
And
now you're going
so
for
these
these
are very-
person.
now, so you're not going to be able to say that human beings, if they live under conditions A or B or C, will automatically go in any direction.
You're-
We know full well that is not true.
You're tugging on our heartstrings to make us agree with you.
Thank you.
which that's something that's there, but there's a lot that you can look at in anyone's life. There's a couple of aspects. I don't want to monopolize it here, but I just wanted to say that there's deterministic structures that one somewhere like a 40-year-old man who was a doctor who had never had any kind of problems in his life, all of a sudden was arrested by the police, and he had started molesting his nieces, or threatened to, or started to. They took him in, and part of the questioning, he started complaining about headaches. They brought him to the doctor. They found a large brain tumor in him, okay? They excised the brain tumor, and all his pedophilic thoughts and so on disappeared, right? And he was no longer subject to this. The court case went on. He was still going on with things, and he started having headaches and some of these same thoughts again. They looked back, and the tumor was there again in the same place. They excised the tumor, and it stopped his issue. So this is something that it's not free will in some cases that people act and do the things they do. Sometimes, often it's determinism. It's the things that are in your past. This man, would you say that somebody that had this tumor that then got treated twice and then ended up not having these challenges anymore, was he responsible? Is he morally responsible for his actions? Should he be brought into the court and made to pay for the things that he's done? This is some of the philosophical points that come
What does this have to do with
out.
determinism? What does this have to do
It's
with
exact. There's a
probability?
cause and effect. They saw that he had
No,
headaches
you
and he had
have
pedophilic
one
thoughts.
case, one individual amongst 8 billion human beings. The point of science is
We don't
not
have
to
time
say
for 8
there's an
billion
exception.
examples.
The point of science is to say this is the general rule. This is how things work. And we can then normalize it, then we can then look at the statistics. We can then say this is this range of activities of which can occur. And this particular happened here. And to look at this over the long time span, saying, how do things change? Do things change in a determined manner? Do things have an actual arrow that says, this is the direction we're going? Or is it sort of a and it's spread out and things just sort of occur?
Right. Well,
Now, that's science.
You
What
can't
you're
debate-
talking about is the wonderful thing called religion. And where we pick
I
up,
do that so
where
seldom,
where we
too.
pick up the bed and say, you no longer are a leper, pick up your bed and walk away. And one instance, which may
Well, you
or
brought up
may
one
not-
instance of
which
Scott,
may
right?
or may not be true.
You brought up 1 out of 8 billion when you brought up Scott, so I'm just trying to bring up an
Well, no,
example. You said
I
it was
brought him up
you said
to-
it was his free will, and I'm just saying that there's other
Well, I brought
potential
him up
things.
as the example of saying you are not the subject of strictly the subject of your environment. You can change.
Strictly, I would agree. Yes.
And
yes.
therefore,
Yeah.
if we're talking probability,
to let-
not determinism.
Hi. Hello? Hello. If you got together the people he molested and their families and said, what should we do? Should we punish him? Should we let him go? What are we going to do? And they would have to come up with something. And they would.
Yeah, but I don't.
What would it base on, though?
What he had done, the damage he had done to his victims.
You
And
see,
they might say,
I'm so happy that I don't have to make decisions like that.
me too.
Mm.
Me
Yeah.
too. But there could be a decision,
And
and it might not be great.
I still ask, is this predetermined? And my answer is no. The poor man has, gosh, I would hope that none of us ever have to experience anything like that. But that's a single individual, it's a single, and we can't draw massive conclusions from one evidence. We can say, let's look at the exception. Let's look at the black swan and say, aha, my thesis was all swans are white. And we developed an entire theory based upon that. And then someone finds the damn black swan. Well, what happens to our theory? And I point to Scott as being my black swan. His environment when he was young was terrible. I don't know. And somehow or other, by his sheer force of will, he's accomplished a hell of a lot in his life. And I'm proud to know him. John?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Mike's talking about a physical cause as opposed to a mental cause. What about psychologists? Are they worthless then because they can't change anything?
Yeah, that's exactly my point. You can set up any set of environments to any human being, and some of them will do something, and some will do something else, can I put a probability on it and say, the likelihood is that under this set of circumstances, these persons will more than ever go in this general direction. Will there be others going? Yes, that's the whole thing.
Right, I agree, for a cause, there's multiple effects.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have 100 people in a room, there'll be 100 different effects.
We'll have 100 different opinions instantly.
Right.
Let's see if I can say this correctly. It sounds like the example you gave with the muons was,
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
It's
you want
my
me to
ears, not
you
your
want me
voice.
to swallow it or what? It sounds like the example you gave with the muons was at a quantum level.
Mhm.
But we know that the effects at a quantum level, they don't affect the macro level because they are so small. I mean, if I hit a cue ball at a certain angle with a certain force, it's always going to go in a certain direction. But all the quantum effects that are going
Well,
on
then I
inside
didn't
that
explain
cue
my
ball-
point, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
I didn't explain my point well. The point that I was trying to make is that everything is probabilistic. So if you look at the largest possible scale, which is the evolution of the universe, which is the evolution of life on the planet, you find a probabilistic effect. If you look at the tiniest possible thing, you're still going to find that variation, and you're still going to see probabilistic, not deterministic.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're saying that just because of the determinists, people say that, hey, if I know 100% of everything there is to know about this reaction, I can predict what's going to happen. And we're saying, well, we can't do that. Therefore, it must be probabilistic. I don't buy that. Just because we don't have all of the information, that doesn't mean it's probabilistic.
Well, there's a spread in the data,
We
and
can-
that's probability by definition.
We can keep talking about it, but it is
It's that
close
time,
to our
isn't it?
ending time. But I
Thank
do
you.
want to, yeah, thank you. I tend to agree that, I mean, I think that even, you mentioned a roll of the die, and I think that is deterministic in a sense. If you know the exact grams of force in the die that you hold, and you know that the power, the exact grams of force that you roll this die out against the table, and the rebound ability of the table and so on, you can predict how a die is going to end up. It'll be, you can have a 4 if you want to hold it a certain way and do a thing. So there's some of the math that's much more complicated than we're able to do. Yeah. Well, it's more complicated than possible. Did you want to?
I was just going to say that I would agree with probability theory, and I know that there's hard science that backs up probability theories in very strange ways sometimes. However, when I look at all of the probability trees that I saw on all of the screens that were just presented, there were only 2 words in any of those bubbles, cause and effect. And however you judge, you know, which precedes which, whatever, you're still talking about cause and effect, whichever side of the argument you're on, and those are the only 2 words that were up on the screen.
In my in my opinion, if determinism, then not free will and not probability. The two are in total conflict. If probability exists, then determinism cannot exist. If determinism exists, then probability does not exist.
If you have perfect knowledge.
There is a philosophical aspect called compatibilism. So you can look that up at the Stanford thing as well, too. Thanks so much. Appreciate people coming in. And sign up if you